All right, let's journey back in time. We're heading to medieval India, a place filled with huge empires, strict social codes, you know the deal. But something was bubbling just under the surface. Two incredible movements were about to change the very heart and soul of the subcontinent. This is the story of a revolution, but not one of swords and shields. This was a revolution of the heart. So it makes you wonder, right? What happens when people decide that their own personal connection to the divine is more important than all the rules, more important than the priests, the complicated ceremonies, the rigid social ladders? What happens when faith itself just breaks free?
Well, in medieval India, the Bhakti and Sufi movements answered that question with a sound like a thunderclap. Seriously, this wasn't some quiet academic debate. This was a full-blown spiritual and social revolution that was about to turn the subcontinent upside down.
Okay, first up, let's tune in to the Bhakti heartbeat. The whole idea behind it was beautifully simple, but so profound. There might be a ton of different paths you can take, but every single one of them leads to one place, a passionate, all-in kind of devotion. So what exactly is Bhakti? Well, at its core, it's about finding a direct line to God, one that's emotional, that's personal, that's intense. It was all about pushing aside those complicated rituals and the authority of the priests. The movement basically said, hey, the only thing that really matters here is your own personal, unfiltered love for the divine. And you know, Bhakti wasn't just this one monolithic thing. It pretty quickly branched into two main streams of thought. On one side, you had Saguna Bhakti. Think of Mirabai and her deep, personal love for Krishna. That's devotion to a god with a recognizable form. But then on the other side, you had Nirguna Bhakti, which was championed by incredible thinkers like Kabir and Guru Nanak. For them, God was formless, abstract, something much bigger than any single name or image could ever capture. And get this, we can actually trace where this explosion of devotion began. It started way down in South India with these amazing poet saints. You had the Alvars, who were all about Vishnu, and the Nayanars, who were devoted to Shiva. And from that southern starting point, their message of personal, passionate faith, well, it spread like wildfire. It moved north over the centuries, totally transforming the spiritual map of the entire subcontinent. But this wasn't just a revolution fought with poems and songs, you know? It also kicked off some really intense philosophical debates. I mean, the greatest minds of the era started tackling the biggest questions imaginable. What is God really? What are we? What is reality itself? Now, I know a table like this can look pretty complex. You've got these big, clashing ideas, like Advaita, which says your soul and God are actually one and the same, versus Dvaita, which argues they're totally separate. But here's the thing, the most important takeaway. While all the philosophers were debating these deep ideas, the message that reached millions of ordinary people was beautifully simple. Your own personal connection to the divine was all that mattered. That was the real path. Now, at the very same time, another sort of parallel revolution of the heart was happening. So let's turn to the Sufi mystical path. You can think of it as this incredible mystical bridge of love, built right within Islam. And just listen to the heart of what they believed. You'll hear an echo of the Bhakti saints. Sufis weren't always focused on rigid, formal rules. For them, the real goal wasn't just to follow dogma. It was to feel it, to experience a personal, overwhelming, all-consuming love for God. So how did this mystical path actually work in practice? Well, it had a pretty clear structure. It all started with a spiritual master, a teacher called the sheikh. He would guide his followers in a community center, a place called a khanqah. Then, after the master passed away, his tomb shrine, or dargah, would become this powerful center of devotion, and people would make a pilgrimage, a ziyarat, to visit it. And this wasn't just some small, obscure idea. It had a massive presence. I mean, just take the Chishti order, for example, one of the most influential in all of India. Their famous dargah in Ajmer is the perfect example. It's a huge pilgrimage site that even today draws millions of people from all kinds of faiths. So when you boil it all down, yes, both of these movements were about a personal connection to God, but they were also about something far more, well, dangerous to the establishment. They were a direct challenge to the old ways of doing things. This was a revolution aimed not just at the heavens, but at the very foundations of society. And if you want to see a jaw-dropping example of this, look no further than the Lingayats. They emerged back in the 12th century in Karnataka, and let me tell you, they weren't just suggesting a few tweaks. They were a truly radical force demanding massive change. I mean, just look at what they were pushing for. They completely rejected the caste system. Done. They challenged the awful treatment of women. They stood against empty rituals and, get this, for the 12th century, they actively encouraged widows to remarry. This wasn't just reform, people. This was a social earthquake. And this spirit of inclusion was everywhere. The saints from these movements came from literally every part of society. You had Mirabai, a Rajput princess, writing these poems that defied the norms of her high caste. And then you had someone like Ravidas, who was born into a so-called untouchable caste, writing poetry so powerful and profound, it was included in the Sikh holy book. Just incredible. So, when you pull the camera back and look at the big picture, what was the ultimate result of all of this? Well, the shared legacy of the Bhakti and Sufi movements was nothing less than smashing barriers, tearing down the walls of language, religion, and caste that had kept people divided for centuries. I mean, their lasting impact is just immense. They brought faith to the people by using local languages everybody could actually understand, not just elite Sanskrit. They were champions for social justice and gender equality. And maybe the biggest thing, by cutting through all the empty rituals, they created this shared culture of pure devotion and love that could cross any and all religious lines. And just think about the timescale here. We're not talking about some flash-in-the-pan trend. This was a deep, powerful spiritual and social transformation that played out over more than 900 years. It fundamentally rewired the cultural DNA of the Indian subcontinent. Which, of course, leaves us with one final thought to chew on. In our world today, a world that's still struggling with inequality and dogma, how do these powerful ideas from medieval India, ideas of radical equality, of social justice, and of a personal faith built on love, how do they still speak to us now?